Well, this is it. We've reached the final week of our time together. We've covered a lot of ground this semester. We began our journey 17 weeks ago with an introduction to media convergence, and we started to familiarize ourselves with the technological and cultural paradigm shifts that created the many-to-many media landscape that we're stepping into as aspiring social media practitioners. It quickly became apparent that this changing landscape requires that we take a holistic and entrepreneurial approach to our media presence. So in week 2, we took a look at how to tap into our core values and produce a body of work against a backdrop of clear, consistent, and constant branding, whether personal or corporate. Once you know who you are as a brand, you need to know who you're trying to reach. So we began in week 3 to investigate our target audiences. And this is where we first really donned our press badges and took on the mantle of journalism, figuring out how to gather facts and cover a beat. We wouldn't quite realize it yet, but we'd soon discover that today's backpack journalist is a paragon for savvy media usage. They engage in every aspect of production and distribution of content. And a journalistic beat is simply an analogy for a corporate mission statement or PR ad campaign, a topical point of brand clarity to rally your work around. And as little Joey Pulitzer quickly discovered, it would be a perfect apprenticeship for those of us trying to learn how to successfully craft, edit, distribute, and promote content on social media. Not to mention navigate all the ethical, socio-political, technological nuances along the way. It worked out all right for Joey. Well, with all of that in our back pockets, it came time for us to start writing something. After all, in order to promote your content on social media, you have to have content to promote. So we started with the nuts and bolts of journalistic writing style, and ultimately the emergent complexities driving the evolution of language in today's media world. And with an eye fixed on clarity, and perhaps a thumb in the pages of our AP style books, we started applying some of the conventional structural frameworks to our articles. We scaled some inverted pyramids and crafted some grand narratives, and we followed our leads to the most click-worthy headlines we could muster in week 6. The application of all this hopefully started to become a little clearer in week 7 when we framed all of this article writing with a discussion of the role of blogging in shaping the evolution from Web 1.0 to the socially entangled monstrosities of Webs 2, 3, 4, 5, and who knows what's next 0.0. That landed us squarely in the realm of social media for 2 weeks of discussion on how to make the most of the cultures and algorithms of this many-to-many playground. Along the way, it became hard to ignore the need to master images and video content if we wanted to hang with the cool kids on this playground. So in week 11, we dove into image culture. We uncovered the power of images to drive culture, and we dissected the design strategies that go into composing powerful images and page layouts. In week 12, we put these skills to work, combining the raw facts of journalism and the emotion of photojournalism to create some data visualization, ultimately taking up the yokes of Edward Tufte and Nigel Holmes to compose some compelling infographics. After that, we began a foray into video production by learning the conventions for broadcast journalism in week 13. We became insiders to the jargon of script writing, ultimately producing video packages of our own in week 14, tweeting and posting all the while. And finally, we capped off our journey with a good hard look at some of the ethical issues underpinning social media, including a crash course in media law. All building up to this cleverly branded, tightly written, compellingly headlined, irresistibly composed, keenly edited, strategically shared, ethically responsible final projects that you have been working so hard to produce, which will ultimately make the corner of the world that it occupies a much better place. Though we've been pretending to be journalists, this class is really all about transferable skills. The learning curves, the problem solving, the technological adaptation, the ethics, the responsibility to become an agenda setter are more than just journalistic concerns. We, as media practitioners, are all given the burden of being responsible stewards of the truth. And the truth, as we've seen, is a complicated and messy thing. Martin Heidegger, the philosopher we mentioned earlier, spent the bulk of his writings reimagining how we think about truth. Now, this is the old model, which comes to us from Plato's allegory of the cave, in which these prisoners are fixed towards the wall of a cave where they see the shadow of these objects flickering on the wall in front of them. And for all they know, that is the true object. This is all they have the experience of, just being able to see the wall of the cave where these shadows dance across the wall. What they don't realize until one of them is freed from this cave and is able to go up to the world above is that these shadows are actually just a derivation of some truer object, this ideal object that exists out there. And when the sun shines in, we get some sort of correspondent version of this truth. And so we can tell how true something is. We can tell something is a true cup, for example, by how much it corresponds to the ideal notion of a cup. And at some point, we can see that something no longer corresponds to that model, and therefore it is no longer a true cup, and we can slough it off and get rid of it. And this works well enough, and it's very insidious. A lot of the ways that we think about the world today still follows this model of having an ideal and having notions that are judged based on their correspondence to that ideal. And this works well enough for cups, but what happens when we start talking about humans? At what point do you have the market cornered on the ideal so much that you can actually tell when something no longer corresponds, and at some point slough off that which doesn't correspond? This is the dangerous kind of thinking that ultimately leads to genocide and Holocaust. Heidegger proposes a new model. His model is called the Relational Model of Truth, which says that we know that something is true not because of how closely it corresponds with some Platonic ideal that may or may not exist and that we certainly have limited at best access to, but we know that this is a cup by its relationships, its uses, its associations, its histories, its context, its connotations, the stories we've heard about cups, and the things that we think about when we use them. It recognizes that everyone has a unique worldview, and that truth resides somewhere at the intersection of those worldviews. Galileo showed us that we only truly saw the universe once we realized it looks different to someone else. This is the relational model of truth, which prioritizes a holistic view of the web of relationships that surround things. It's about the messy intersections, about the collisions and the grinding friction between those relationships, colliding and ultimately coalescing into some sort of coherent whole picture. Truth is born out of those messy collisions. And relationships are tricky because you're in a lot of relationships at once, even with things that you may not be aware of. But that model of truth is what this many-to-many paradigm is all about. Consumers are now producers. You may be part of the many, but you are now privileged because you have been educated as though you're the one. You have the ability to help people separate fact from fiction. You are the tour guide through the postmodern noise of Wikipedia knowledge. Maslow be damned, we are now gathering all the right tools for the job. We have them at hand, and we can put them to work. So go out and be agenda setters. Step outside of your algorithmic echo chambers, pop your filter bubbles, and step boldly into the future of social media. I hope you go with clarity, consistency, and constancy, and make the world a better place, one post at a time. Good luck.